Okay, good evening, everyone. We are right now going to be doing the third day of the Daily Mitzvah. We are continuing the Rambam's introduction to Sefer Hamitzvos. And what the Rambam is doing is he's teaching us the formula of how to count the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And as the Rambam is demonstrating to us, is that it is a lot harder than it sounds to actually open up a Torah, open up a Chumash, and start looking for all the statements and come to 613 commandments. It is actually quite difficult. It's a skill, it's an art, and you need a formula, you need a science. You need to have principles. There are 14 principles that will help guide you reach the number 613, and so that you will actually know what the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah are. Yesterday we learned the first three. Today we're going to learn the next six. So we have a lot to go through. Let's get on with the show. Here we go. The fourth principle is don't count any general statements in the Torah as a mitzvah in itself. You see, in the Torah, there are many statements that the statement itself is not telling you to do anything specifically, but it is rather a command which is encouraging you to keep the Torah and mitzvahs in general. What's an example of that? You shall safeguard, you should keep my commands, my decrees. Safeguard my covenant with you. And the Rambam also says, this is maybe a little bit controversial because there are many other great sages that disagree with the Rambam on this, but the Rambam says, the pasuk Kedoshim to you shall be holy, is a mitzvah in the Torah. But Kedoshim to you, says the Rambam, it's not telling you to do anything specifically. Kedoshim to you shall be holy, is a general statement telling you, be Jewish, keep Torah mitzvahs. Every additional mitzvah you do makes you holy. And the Rambam brings down here from the Medrash that every additional mitzvah that Hashem gave us increased holiness to the Jewish people. So it's a general statement in the Torah, be holy. And one more example that Rambam gives, which is also a good example, it's about a bris, and we're about to celebrate a bris any day now. I had a baby boy a few days ago. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, and you shall circumcise the foreskin of your hearts, which is, of course, using it as a figure of speech that a yid should prime themselves in the right way to keep all the mitzvahs. So these are general statements, says the Rambam, and all these general statements that are not telling you to do something specific, but they're general encouraging statements to keep Torah mitzvahs are not counted. Next principle, the fifth principle. Don't count the reason of a mitzvah as a mitzvah itself. Now this may seem very obvious, but it is not always very simple. And the Rambam points out that some of his predecessors who tried formulating these lists of 650 mitzvahs got this wrong. Sometimes a statement in the Torah which may come across as a prohibition, as the Torah is telling you don't do something, is actually not a prohibition, but it's giving a reason on the prohibition that preceded it, that it said just before. For example, here's an example. The Torah says that if a man gets married to a woman and then he divorces her and she gets remarried, then he is never allowed to remarry her. And then the Torah says, "V'lo yisachti es haaretz," and you shall not bring sin into the land. Now, those words, "V'lo yisachti es haaretz," is that a separate prohibition, or is it simply giving a reason why this man shall never remarry this woman? Because this is considered an act of sin. Don't bring sin into this world. So the Rambam says, don't count that as a separate mitzvah. It's simply giving a reason. And there's many times that the Torah is going to say this. Don't do this, like that you don't defile the land, etc., etc. These are not giving you specific mitzvahs or prohibitions, what to do or what not to do. It is giving a general reason, and you have to be careful to not count such statements, even though at first read it has the word viloi, and you shall not. It sounds like it's a commandment. No, but it's not one of the 630 mitzvahs. Next principle, the sixth principle, is the principle that anytime the Torah tells you the same idea, but one in a positive form and one in a negative, prohibitive form, count them as two separate mitzvahs. And this is a very interesting feature that's part of Torah in general, is that there are many mitzvahs in the Torah, that the way the Torah articulates to you the mitzvah is both in the form of a positive commandment and in the form of a prohibitive commandment, although they're really telling you the exact same thing. Here's a few examples. The Torah tells you to keep Shabbos. That's a positive mitzvah. The Torah also tells you, and you shall not violate the Shabbos. Don't do work on Shabbos. That's a negative mitzvah. Now, it's the exact same thing. They're both telling you to do the same thing. And you fulfill one mitzvah, you fulfill both mitzvahs, or you desecrate both mitzvahs, through the same exact act. So you may think that that's just the same mitzvah. Count that as only one. Says the Rambam, no. Whenever there is these two opposing forms, count both of them as a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah's assay, there's a positive mitzvah, there's a lois assay, there is a negative mitzvah. We count both of them, and indeed, we're going to see, once we start learning the Sefer Hamitzvos, that this happens quite often. Many mitzvahs in the Torah are articulated both ways. We count both of them, each as a mitzvah. One last example that Rambam gives, very interesting. The way the Torah, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, l'yisika cha'im al habanim, that one shall not take the baby chicks with the mother bird still present. So that's a prohibition. Don't take the children when the mother is still present. And then the Torah immediately says, Shaleach teshalach esa'im, send away the mother. That's a positive mitzvah. So there's a mitzvah to send away the mother bird, and there's a prohibitive mitzvah, the prohibition, and don't take away the chicks when the mother bird is still present. That's another example. And the point is, these are two mitzvahs, and which that means that very often when we keep a mitzvah, we actually are getting two mitzvahs, not one mitzvah. Moving along to the next principle, the seventh principle is don't count the details of a mitzvah as separate mitzvahs themselves. This is a very interesting idea. All mitzvahs have many, many details in them. And that's one of the things that you see when you learn halacha, when you learn Gemara, that one mitzvah all of a sudden has so many different applications, and the details change depending on the scenario, depending on the variables, etc. So you may think that when you find the mitzvah, even sometimes the Torah itself gives you a lot of details. So you could think, okay, well, every single detail is a separate mitzvah. Says the Rambam, no. What are a few examples? Let me give you a few examples over here. One example that the Rambam gives is a korban. There's a sacrifice that there's a mitzvah to bring whenever we have a holy temple standing in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, that if a Yid does a sin by mistake, he didn't mean to do it, but he committed a prohibition of the Torah. He has to bring a korban. There's a special type of korban, of sacrifice, he has to bring. But it depends what type of person are you. Are you the regular common folk, an Am Haaretz? Are you a Nasi? Are you the prince of the Jewish people? Are you the president of the Sanhedrin? Are you a Kohen Gadol? So depending on the status of who you are, it changes what kind of korban you actually bring. So it says the Rambam, you may think, okay, that's three separate mitzvahs right there. No, but if you think about it, it's actually one mitzvah, generally speaking. And the Rambam calls out once again his predecessor, the Baal Halachas Kedeles, and the Rambam says, look, he usually gets this right, but sometimes he actually takes many details of one mitzvah and he counts them as separate mitzvahs. And the example that the Rambam gives over here is the mitzvah of tzadas. There's a whole mitzvah of how to treat and what a person has to do when they are inflicted with tzadas, which is a spiritual, a physical ailment, which is commonly referred to as leprosy, but it's not the medical leprosy. It was a spiritual sickness that afflicted a person. And the Baal Halachas Kedeles counts 11 different details as different mitzvahs. And the Rambam says he's wrong. It's only one mitzvah, even though the Torah gave you all these different details. Says the Rambam, if you're going to count all these details of the mitzvahs, even the ones that are only explicitly mentioned in the Torah, you'll be left with more than 2,000 mitzvahs, and obviously that takes you way past the magic number of 613, so obviously you cannot count the details. And the Rambam says it sometimes actually takes a little bit of wisdom, a lot of wisdom, to really think this through. When you read a statement, a mitzvah in the Torah, you have to think, is this a standalone mitzvah, or is this a detail within a larger mitzvah, and therefore it's not counted as one of the 613 mitzvahs, as its own mitzvah? The Rambam says this is one of the most important pillars, this is most important principles in how to count the mitzvahs, and it takes a lot of wisdom to get this one right. Okay, moving right along. The eighth principle. Don't count a negative statement as a prohibition. Which means sometimes the Torah is going to tell you, don't do this. And that is a prohibition. That is a mitzvah. That is a command. Sometimes the Torah is going to say, and this did not happen, or this will not happen. And obviously that is not a command. That's just more a passive negative statement, not a negative command. Says the Rambam, make sure not to count those. Now you would think, come on, that's pretty obvious. But in the Hebrew grammar, in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Hebrew of the Torah, it's actually not simple at all, because it's the exact same word. The word is loy, Loy. Loy could either mean you shall not, or loy could mean it did not, or loy could mean it will not. Which one is it? You have to be very, very careful. It says the Rambam, you have to use a lot of thought. You have to really think it through. You have to critically analyze the pasuk and think through. Is this a command, or is it simply telling you a negative statement? Sometimes it's very, very obvious. Sometimes it's actually very, very confusing. It takes a lot of wisdom to make that judgment call, to make that discernment. What's a few examples of this? Here's an easy example. The Torah says, "V'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe," and no other prophet will ever stand, or did ever stand, again for the Jewish people like Moshe, which means Moshe was the greatest prophet. No other prophet is ever going to be as great as Moshe. Okay, is that a command? It's not a command. It's not telling the Jews, you shall not ever have a prophet. The Torah is telling you, just by the way, just letting you know, this will never happen. And there are many such examples. And the Rambam gives many examples over here of where you have the word loy, and sometimes actually very, very confusing. Is this telling you a command, or is this just telling you a passive statement, a negative passive statement? And one example that the Rambam quotes from the Gemara, just to stress the importance of this idea and how confusing it could sometimes be, which is a little bit of a comical example, is the pasuk says, "The yiftach ishbar," if a person digs and opens up a pit in a public space, v'lo yichasanu, and he did not cover the pit. So this is the Torah setting the stage, setting the narrative for the laws of if somebody causes somebody else to hurt themselves. Somebody falls into the pit, he damages, he breaks a foot, etc. So what happens with that? So the Gemara says, the pasuk says, "V'lo yichasanu." Is that a command? And he shall not cover it? Is there such a mitzvah in the Torah that if you open a pit, you shouldn't cover the pit? No, obviously the words "V'lo yichasanu" is more passive. It's storytelling. And this person did not cover the pit. So, says the Rambam, just like over there, you have to be careful. What is the Torah telling you? With the word "V'lo," you have to be careful over here as well, that you always get that right. And once again, the Rambam says, I think I mentioned this, you have to use sometimes a lot of discernment. And it's not always very easy, especially for the regular common student, the lay people, that when they read the Torah, to always know what the word "V'lo" means, if it's a prohibition or it's simply storytelling, and you have to really think that through properly. Okay, the ninth principle, the final principle that we're going to be talking about today is, don't count the specific quotes in the Torah. You have to count only the substance of the mitzvah, which means like this. Many mitzvahs are repeated multiple times in the Torah. Here's two examples that the Rambam gives. The mitzvah to keep Shabbos, the mitzvah to rest on Shabbos, is mentioned in the Torah 12 times. The mitzvah, the command to not, for a Yid is not allowed to drink blood, mentioned in the Torah 7 times. And so too, the mitzvah of tefillin is mentioned multiple times. Many examples of this. So you may think, okay, every single time the Torah says you shall not, every single time there's a repetition, count that as a separate mitzvah. The mitzvah of Shabbos is 12 mitzvahs. Says the Rambam, no. Don't count the statements of the Torah, count the substance of the mitzvah or the substance of the prohibition. And count only once. So even though the Torah tells us to keep Shabbos 12 times, it is only one mitzvah. Drinking blood 7 times, it's only one mitzvah. And the Rambam speaks about the concept that sometimes the Torah is going to repeat itself multiple times, the same command multiple times. Another notable example is the mitzvah against hurting the feelings and against what's the right word? Inflicting pain upon a convert. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. You have to be very sensitive to somebody who converted to the Jewish faith. It's mentioned 3 times. Why does the Torah repeat itself? So there's 2 reasons. Sometimes the Torah does it in order to re-emphasize and strengthen the severity or the importance of a mitzvah. And sometimes it's within these repetitions where the Torah is dropping critical hints and clues that we are able to use, which we spoke about yesterday, in order to derive additional laws using the Yud Gimel Midas Shatered and the Dreshes Bahem, the 13 tools of derivation that Hashem gave to Moshe to extract and derive additional laws and additional mitzvahs. Okay, so that's all there. But even though there's repetition, and sometimes there's very good reason for the repetition, it doesn't change the fact that there's only one mitzvah and one mitzvah only. And at this point, the Rambam also goes into tremendous length into an additional detail that comes up. We're not going to get into that. If you want, you can look up the Rambam and see for yourself. And dear friends, with that, we have another 6 very critical, important principles of how to count the Taryag Mitzvos, the 630 Mitzvos of the Torah. Thank you for joining. I hope you enjoy, and we will see you all tomorrow before Shabbos, and I'm going to send you the Sefer Hamitzvos for Shabbos. Zag gesund, everybody. We'll see you soon.